The Defense Futures Simulator bridges the gap between defense strategy and defense budgets by allowing users to quickly explore a range of strategic and budgetary choices and understand the connections between them. DFS is freely available to the public, and anyone can make an account and start using the tool right away. You just go to defensefutures.aei.org. In the upper right-hand corner, you will see a button to sign up and create an account. It takes just a few seconds, and all you need to create an account is a valid email address. The other fields here are optional. Once you create your account and log in, it takes you to the dashboard, which will be empty at first until you start using the tool. Now, the core of DFS is building budget scenarios. A scenario is an alternative budget you create in DFS, and you can save multiple scenarios in your account. Go to the Scenarios page and click the Create button in the upper right-hand corner. Give your scenario a name and select a baseline from the list of baselines that are available to you. In DFS, a baseline is a starting point for the budget and force structure in a scenario. So for example, if you select the PB25 baseline for your scenario, all of the changes you make are relative to what was requested in the President's budget request for 2025. If you don't change a particular item in the baseline, then it continues as planned. Now, once you've created a new scenario, there are two ways to start building it, and you can switch in between these as you go. The first is to select items manually, and the second is to use the strategic assistant. So I'm going to walk you through how to select items manually at first, and then we'll come back to the strategic assistant. Go to the item selection page. This will give you a dashboard at the top that shows you all the changes you've made and what they add up to in terms of the budget year by year. So since I just created this scenario, the change from baseline is $0 in every year. You can see what the baseline budget is for each year and what my new budget is once I start making changes. Just below that, you see different buttons where you can filter all of the items that are shown below by military service. You can also change this to filter by domain if you want to put all of your air options together, all of your land options together, etc. As you filter these options, your service or domain-specific dashboard also updates, and these show you some summary force metrics that relate to that particular service. And right here, you can see the change from the baseline budget for that particular service as well. Now, down below, all of the items in the tool are organized by category. So if you expand one of these categories, you can see which items you can modify in the baseline that fall under that particular category. Once you click on an item, it brings up a side panel that shows you more details about it, a picture, a description. If you want to see more details, you say show more, and it'll give you more of the details that are running in the back end for this particular option. For each item, remember that all changes are relative to the baseline. So for this particular item, it shows that the baseline plan in PB25 is to buy 15 of these aircraft in the first year, 15 in the second year, 10 in the third year, and then none after that. So if you want to buy more than planned, you would move the slider up. If you want to buy fewer than planned, you'd move the slider down. Now, there are over 200 items in PB25 baseline, and if you don't see an item that you would like to have included, you can always go down here, click the Send Feedback button, and just tell us that you want a new item included. Write your description, submit your feedback, and our team will look into that and see if that's something that we can add to the simulator. There's several different types of items, and I want to walk you through the different options you have that depend on which type of item you're dealing with. The first type of item I want to talk about is an item that's currently in development. The F/A-XX, the Navy's next-gen fighter, is a good example of this. When an item is in development, you can't buy more or less of it yet because it's not yet in production. But what you can do is terminate the program. You can delay the program by 1 year, or you can accelerate it by 1 year. Now, there are limits built into the tool. You can only accelerate in 1 year. If you want to accelerate in a different year, you can do that, but it's only accelerating 1 year total over the baseline. You can terminate in any year, but once you terminate, then the program ends and there's nothing else you can do with it in subsequent years. You can delay it by 1 year, and then you have the option to delay it again in the following year, and so forth. And at any time, if you want to undo all of your selections, you can just click the reset button here. Another type of program is a new start program. This is something that is not in the baseline, and this would be entirely new, added to the budget. So the SSNX is a next generation attack submarine concept, and your only option with a new start program is picking which year you want to begin the program. So obviously, the sooner you begin it, the more years of funding will be included. If you begin it later, the funding begins later as well. Now, a third type of option in the tool is a procurement option. So this is for something like the F-35A that is already in production. And your options here are to increase the number of items being bought each year above the baseline. So you can see the baseline here is 42, 42, 47, and so forth. Or you can reduce the number they plan to buy below the baseline plan. And of course, you can terminate the program as well. And what that does is it completely ends all funding for the program in that year and all subsequent years. And you can't restart it. You can't adjust the procurement numbers after that because the program has ended. Now, we also include limits into how much you can increase or reduce production. You have a maximum production quantity that's allowed. That is an estimate based on what industry would reasonably be able to deliver. You also have a minimum production level. That is the lowest production rate at which industry could build this platform. If you want to cut below that minimum rate, your only option is to terminate the program. A fourth type of item in the tool is a legacy platform. That is something that has already been fielded. It's no longer in production. And your option here is to retire more or retire less of it. So you can see here the baseline plan is we're going to go down to 180 of this platform in the first year, then 160, 120, and so forth. So I can retire more than currently planned in that first year. And you can see all subsequent years go down as well as the retirement plan would continue after that. Or I could keep more of these planes. If I want to keep all of them and not retire any of them, I can move all of these sliders up to the very top, and I will not retire any more of these planes. A fifth type of option is for major elements of force structure. These are existing forces that are already in the force. And you can see here for active armored brigade combat teams, the baseline plan is we're going to maintain 11 of these BCTs in every year across the 5-year plan. And my options here are to add more of them or to reduce them. Now notice if I reduce the number of these units by 1 in the first year, then the baseline resets to that lower number in all subsequent years. If I increase it by 1, then the new baseline becomes 1 higher in all subsequent years. And so if you want to keep increasing year after year, you can do that. And again, there are limits here on how many of these units that you can increase or decrease per year, just to be realistic in how quickly you can build or get rid of force structure. The last type of option I want to show you are funding related options. And this is where you are just adding funding for a particular activity or program, and you're not buying a specific unit of something. So a good example of this is Army Operational Readiness. The units of funding here are $1 billion per year. And so if you want to increase Army readiness funding, you can do that in increments of $1 billion. You can see it's updating the cost here at the bottom. And if you want to do that for each year, you need to increase that funding for each year. It doesn't automatically continue year to year. As I've shown you how to make selections for all of these different options in the tool, you've noticed that the budget calculations are automatically updating here on the bottom. They're also updating here in the dashboard on the top, and these force metrics are updating as well. Now, what's going on in the background is the system is taking into account all of the procurement, all of the research and development, the operation and maintenance, personnel, military construction cost, everything that has to do with each particular item. And it's accounting for inflation, it's accounting for typical growth in your operation and maintenance and personnel costs that are above the rate of inflation. It's factoring all that in to come up with your total numbers. It's also keeping track of things like how it is affecting key force metrics that the military relies on to understand the capacity and capability of its forces. And also for some procurement items, as you buy more of them, it is dynamically adjusting the unit cost. So as you buy more of some things, the unit cost will go down. As you buy fewer of them, the unit cost will go up. And another thing to point out here is the force metric shown here in the dashboard. This is just a summary. There's a more complete set of force metrics that you can access in a report, and we will talk about that in just a little bit. So the second way you can build your scenario is using what we call the strategic assistant. What the strategic assistant does is it takes your preferences as you express them here using these slider bars, and it goes through and it searches the full range of options that are possible in the tool. And it comes back with a solution that attempts to match your preferences as closely as possible. The first thing that you see here are your strategic priorities. And so you can show how much you want to increase the emphasis on a particular priority or decrease the emphasis on that priority. The blue tick marks you see here are the current level of emphasis based on the selections I've already made manually in the tool. You can set these independently. I would caution you that there are some things you can do that will be at odds with one another, but that's fine. So for example, if I want to greatly increase the emphasis placed on China, the kind of capabilities that would be needed to deter China, but I want to greatly decrease the emphasis on Russia, you can do that, but a lot of the things that will help you put more emphasis on China are also things that would actually put more emphasis on Russia. So you are basically sending mixed signals to the strategic assistant. Now, it's not going to get mad at you, but it will try to do the best it can to meet these conflicting objectives if you create that kind of conflict in the inputs that you give it. If one of these strategic priority areas is not that important to you and you don't want the algorithm to try to optimize for it, you can just click Ignore Run. Now, ignore is different than leaving it in the middle at 0. When you leave it in the middle at 0, what you're telling the strategic assistant is you want to maintain the current level of emphasis on this particular priority. Ignoring it says, I don't really care where this falls. I care about all the other things that I'm showing. As you go down below the strategic priorities is another section we call strategic trade-offs. And this is basically the iron triangle of defense, modernization, operational readiness, and force structure. And you can tell the assistant how much emphasis you want it to place on each of these. And again, if, for example, if you're going to move all of these higher, so you're telling it you want to focus more on modernization and readiness and force structure, and then you don't give it any more funding in your budget preferences below here, you're creating a conflict. How's it supposed to do that? How's it supposed to increase all of these things if it doesn't have more money? Again, it's going to try to do the best it can to navigate between all of these conflicting objectives. And of course, the last section down here are your budget preferences. And again, like all of the sliders, it's relative to the current baseline. And so if you increase this, you're telling it, for example, I want to increase funding $101 billion above the current plan for this year. And you can set those budget preferences separately for each year in the baseline. You go back up to the top after you've set all your preferences. If you click Run Strategic Assistant, it'll give you several different options for how you can run this. You can choose the level of speed versus quality in your run. So you can get a faster result, but it will not do as good a job of optimizing. Or you can select to run for a longer time and it'll give you a better quality result that is more optimized according to your preferences. You can set the level of political sensitivity that you want to apply when it's running it. And so that will take into account that certain things are known to be unpopular with members of Congress. And so if you say no political sensitivity, it's going to ignore that. And if you make one of the other selections, then it will start to take it into account. And the last selection you can make here is how strictly you want it to apply the budget constraints that you've given it. Now you can run it completely unconstrained and it will ignore the funding constraints entirely and just come back with a budget unconstrained solution, or you can give it weak budget constraints, moderate, or strict budget constraints. And when you're ready, you can click Start. Now, one warning here is that when you run the Strategic Assistant, it will overwrite whatever manual selections you have made in this scenario. Okay, so now it's loading and then running the algorithm, and you wait here and you can see the results when they're ready. One thing to note when you are setting your strategic preferences, it may be tempting to move these sliders all the way to the extremes. Keep in mind though that when you set it all the way to positive 100%, you're telling the assistant you want it to increase every single item in the budget that it all relates to China. If you move it to a negative 100%, what you're telling it is you want it to cut absolutely everything that is possibly related to China out of the budget. If you leave it in the middle at 0, you're telling it you want to maintain the current emphasis. If you leave them all at 0, then essentially what you're saying is make no changes relative to the baseline. Another part of these scenarios that I'll walk you through are the reports. And this will give you summary information on the selections that you've either made manually or that the Strategic Assistant has made for you in this particular scenario. The first one I like to look at is the Selected Items report. And what this does, it just shows you a list of all the items where you've made selections and the change that you've made in each year and the total budget impact of these particular changes. You can sort it by each column in here. You can also export this to an Excel file. The second report I want to show you is the Add Cut Summary. This is one of my favorites, and what this does, it produces a chart that shows you how much you've added and how much you've cut from the budget. You can do this by year, by military service, or by domain. The green bar on top is how much you've added in total. The red is how much you've cut. And the blue line here is the net change in budget. The third type of report here is the force metrics report. And so this is where you can get into all of the detailed force metrics that the tool is tracking. You can select all here, or you can just select the ones that you happen to be interested in. I'm going to select all, and if you scroll down to the bottom right, you can generate that report. And it will aggregate them by force metric. But if you want to see where these changes are coming from, like in total Navy aircraft, you can expand these down and see, okay, so came from fighter attack aircraft and ISR aircraft and aerial refueling. And I can expand it and get all the way down to individual items and how many changed by year and what the end state is. We include the end state here because some things that you may change during the period of years the baseline covers may not actually be fielded, they may not actually take effect until later years. So the end state is once all of the changes you've made have come to fruition. What is the end result? And again, you can export this to an Excel file if you want to do additional analysis outside the tool or just store the results for your own use. And the last one I want to show you here is the cross-scenario comparison report. This actually allows you to compare different scenarios. Now you are limited to only the scenarios that you have access to. And so in this example, I only have 2 scenarios that I've made in my account, and I can generate a comparison. And so up here at the top, the first thing it'll show you is how similar these scenarios are. If you have more than 2, it'll list every pair combination of them. It'll give you a similarity score. 100% means it's an exact match. 0 means that there's no overlap, they have nothing in common, and negative 100% means they are exact opposites of one another. And so that gives you your overall kind of score matching. And then down below, you can see item by item how the different scenarios compare to one another. These cells are shaded. Dark red means you've made the maximum possible decrease in this area. Dark green means you've made the maximum possible increase, and white means no change. So you can see here the 2 scenarios I'm comparing both made some cuts in brigade combat teams, and it looks like they both made the maximum cut in active striker brigade combat teams. But you can see here they made some different choices going in opposite directions with the active infantry brigade and National Guard infantry brigade combat teams. Taking you back to your scenarios page here, there are a few things you can see on this page. This just gives you a list of all the scenarios in your account. You can see whether it's something you can edit or something you have read-only permission to, if it's something someone else shared with you. And you can sort by each of these columns as well. For each scenario, you can share it with other users in the tool. Now you have to know the email address that they use to set up their account, but if you type in their email address here, you can share it as a read-only copy, or you can give them full edit permissions of your scenario. You can obviously go back in and edit your scenario. You can also copy a scenario. If you want to make variations of it, you can just click copy, and then you can start making changes to the copy of your scenario. Or if you've got scenarios that you don't want to keep anymore, you can delete them. Thank you for taking the time to go through this. And again, as you have any questions or if you encounter any issues as you're using the tool, please feel free to send us feedback using the feedback function here in DFS.